our work doesn't get done by the 40 hours or 50 hours or 60 hours we put in every week. It gets done by our physical, mental, emotional, and spiritual energy. So let's get wiser about how we use and restore our energies.
Hey everybody, welcome to the Book Leads Impactful Books for Life and Leadership. I'm your series host and leadership performance coach, John Jaramillo. This podcast series is about getting to the books that have impacted the lives of the people in my network. So these are great leads that I'll be having conversations with on these books. I want to get to those books that have impacted the most, made the most change in their life, has left an indelible mark on who they are, books that really stand out, whether they are the author or not. And my guest today is Brian Gorman. And for decades, Brian has been engaged with change at the individual, organizational, and social levels. Through his business, TransformingLives.Coach, he serves those who are seeking to strengthen their leadership in today's disrupted business environments, working with leaders from the front line to the C-suite. Today, Brian is focused on the implications of artificial intelligence on the future of work and on society more broadly. He does so through his role as a coach, trusted advisor, speaker, author, and wisdom circle keeper. Brian is an ICF certified professional coach, a member of ICF-New York City, a certified Edgewalker Facilitator, and a member of the Gay Coaches Alliance. He also hosts a podcast, Conversations, where his guests include thought leaders who are shaping the future. Brian and his son Brandon live in Hoboken, New Jersey, and I was lucky enough to be introduced to Brandon by Judy Neal, who I had on episode 131 of this series back in May of 2025. And in that episode, we covered two of Judy's books, Edgewalkers, People and Organizations That Take Risks, Build Bridges, and Break New Ground, and the other book, Creating Enlightened Organizations, 4 Gateways to Spirit at Work. And Brian, it's amazing through this series, meeting different people, to put it simply, networking through great people. I don't want to be surrounded by people that think exactly like me, but there's just certain people that put things a certain way, maybe the way that they approach their life, their career, their coaching in certain cases. And when I spoke to Judy about the Edgewalker program mindset, just the belief, that structure, that way of being, it really did strike a chord in me, so that I can meet you through her, knowing that you have that kind of similar mindset and approach to life, work, career, whatever it may be. I'm grateful that I got to meet her through another connection, and that connection has continued to you. So thank you for being here.
John, I am really excited about this conversation.
So Brian, first off, who are you today? If you could, I gave the great bio, some great background that you have, but what does your work look like in the day-to-day these days?
It's varied. It's definitely varied. A lot of writing to get the word out through LinkedIn posts, through my LinkedIn newsletter, Enlightened Leadership, through my Substack, recording my podcasts. I typically have at least one guest a week, and sometimes more, and reading. And then there's the work with clients. All of that, I mean, one of the things for me, John, that's so exciting about all of that is that it keeps me learning and growing.
Yeah. I not only because it came up in a conversation I just had where literally just like that, it keeps you going, it keeps you evolving, that you are working towards something great, but that your day-to-day is just evolving so much because you're curious. You're seeking out new information. You're open-minded. That curiosity is just, for me, it's peak performance, but I appreciate you sharing that.
I know people who retire. I mean, I'm of that age. I'm 76 years old. And they choose to sort of cocoon themselves from the world. And the longer you sit in that cocoon, the further away from the world you get, because the world keeps changing. You know, I first got into any aspect of technology back in 1980, 81, when I introduced word processing to the fundraising program I was running. A few years later, I had my first computer. It was a state-of-the-art IBM dual floppy disk
Yeah.
with a printer that needed an eggshell padding around it so that it didn't deafen you. And today, ChatGPT is one of my daily companions.
Yeah. So what do you think, how, stepping outside of the conversations I normally ask, I go down these rabbit holes. How has that changed you, Brian, in terms of the technology? I mean, we can talk about efficiency, productivity, but when we talk about AI and LLMs and all of those tools, we talk about efficiency and that it'll save us time so that we can think in different ways, be creative in different ways. But overall, because you've been there from like word processor days to today, what is your thinking about that shift? Not even a shift. I mean, that's just a complete transformation in only, 4 decades, 5 decades. What can you speak to that based on your knowledge in your field as a coach and just what it means for the workplace?
Well, first of all, it just feels very natural to me at this point. I don't really, it's been a long time since I've been shocked by technology. I think what it means for the future of work, and we can get into this in more detail. Back in 2021, I was saying to people, I think we are on the verge of the equivalent of the Industrial Revolution. When AI, ChatGPT, I guess, raised AI into the common vocabulary, I was sure of that. And I think we are at a point where we have some very serious decisions to make. And unfortunately, too many people are responding as if there is no decision. And what I mean by that is we keep on hearing the voice that says AI is going to take over jobs, the extreme voice that says AI is going to take over the world. We have a choice as to how we use AI in our personal lives as well as in our professional lives. The choices we make now are going to resonate and echo for decades to come. I believe AI is an incredible catalyst, and that it can, in fact, be a catalyst for a future of work that is more human and more humane than we have ever experienced, not just in our lifetimes, but in the history of the world.
So, what do you imagine it looks like? You don't have to go into too much detail, but just in general, because obviously more and more people are paying attention to that conversation. I'm not quite an alarmist believing that it's going to take over. I do believe people need to learn about it, but how do you see that balance playing out, just in general?
Well, in general, the the first point I want to make is there's a difference between intelligence and wisdom. AI has the ability to even the intelligence playing field for anyone who has access and knows how to prompt it. When I was writing my book, I asked ChatGPT the difference between intelligence and wisdom, and it said, intelligence can tell you how to do anything. Wisdom will tell you whether or not you should.
Hmm.
And so I see it playing out in automating those intelligence-driven tasks that require no wisdom, and allowing us to become much wiser individually and collectively in how we are using AI in all aspects of our life, not just at work.
Brian, I understand how you got to this place doing all this great work. Can you walk me through when you launched into your career? Usually I like to start with people around high school, like when they're entering the workforce. I want to get a sense of the path that they've taken to now. So can you kind of guide me through those paths and pivots that led you to today?
We'll do it quickly. We only have so much time. I started working actually in junior high school. My grandfather was a pharmacist. My father was a pharmacist. Gorman Drugs sat across from the YMCA on Main Street in Hackensack, New Jersey. And in either seventh or eighth grade, I became the delivery boy. So after school, I would hop on my bike, pedal 2 miles down to the drugstore, take deliveries wherever they needed to go, and pedal home and do my homework. We're going to fast forward to my freshman year in college. I was an Eagle Scout. I was an introvert. And I went to Syracuse University deciding that I was going to redefine my social presence, if you will. And I don't think I even had those words for it at the time, but I didn't want to be one of the odd guys out anymore. So I joined a fraternity. But I joined Alpha Phi Omega, which is the National Service Fraternity. So we didn't have a house. We had an office on the fourth floor of the men's gym. And that year, my freshman year, we had a member of the local Scout Council come and ask for a volunteer to help establish a Boy Scout troop on the Onondaga Reservation outside of Syracuse. I volunteered to do so. Another gentleman and I ran the troop for my entire undergraduate time. I very quickly realized two things. One, the Boy Scouts that were in our troop really didn't need the Boy Scouts. They needed a safe, warm gathering place, especially in the wintertime. The second thing, which has underpinned my entire career, is I realized that the university's portrayal of its Native American mascot at the time was both racist and xenophobic. We had a Native American played by Caucasian fraternity brothers dressed up like Hollywood Indians, running around like they were drunk, and sometimes they were. For my entire undergraduate career, I attempted to get the university to change its mascot or to fund a scholarship for a Native American to portray the mascot. I failed on both counts, but it really ignited this spark for change in me that has been burning ever since. And so throughout my career, whether I was a fundraiser and brought in to re-energize a moribund fundraising program, whether I was brought in as a dorm director to turn a dormitory into a residence hall, whether I was an Air Force drill sergeant who consistently turned out award-winning trainees while being told I should cut my hair shorter or shine my shoes more. Throughout my career, it has been about people and change. So even as I talk about AI, AI is the catalyst. The really important message is how we as people respond to that.
Brian, so where do you think that, that wherewithal, that awareness in you, what you saw on the reservation when you were setting up that troop, how you've affected these different groups that you've worked in, how you've worked with them, navigated them, where do you think that eye for humanity came from in you? Did you see it? Was it modeled for you and your parents, your community, mentors? What do you think it originated with you?
I was born in December of 1949. We were in very early days of the boomer generation, if you will. And as I said, I never really fit in. I remember the assassination of John F. Kennedy Jr. and Robert Kennedy. I remember reading about lynchings in the newspapers when I was probably still in junior high school. As we get into the 1960s, I remember the race riots. I remember Vietnam. I mean, I was drafted during Vietnam out of graduate school. I remember the Vietnam protests. I remember the killings at Kent State. All of those things, I think, fed into this passion, if you will, for humanity. When I got to college, I was a architecture major. When I graduated college, I was a cultural anthropology major because I realized it wasn't buildings that fed me, it was people.
And then what was graduate school? What did you study?
Well, I went back to Syracuse for a master's in cultural anthropology, was drafted my first semester, which is how I ended up as a drill sergeant for 4 years in the Air Force. While I was in the Air Force, I got master's degrees in both human relations and higher ed administration. I went back to Syracuse after I got out for a doctorate in higher ed and got all the way through the qualifying exams before I had a falling out with my faculty advisor about whether what I wanted to research was worthy of scholarly inquiry. So,
do you mind sharing what that was?
Well, again, at the time, I was actually fundraising for the Carrier Dome. And when I would ask people in the development office, the fundraising office, why do people give to different aspects of the university? They basically shrugged their shoulders. And so that was the research that I wanted to do. All of the higher ed faculty were adjuncts. They were college presidents. They were college deans and so forth and so on. So the university would not allow them to chair a dissertation committee as adjunct faculty. I was assigned to an elementary education faculty advisor. When I approached him about my dissertation, he said, and I will never forget his words, that topic is not worthy of scholarly inquiry. At the time, he was researching what impact the color of a classroom wall had on retaining information amongst second graders.
No judgment, but okay.
And I said, I literally said to him, look, I'm not going to stop learning. I don't need a PhD hanging on the wall.
So what did you do? You'd gone into the military, went back for education. That happened with your doctorate. Where did work fall in here? After this, did you leave to go to the workforce, or were you working at the time?
I was working full time from the time I got out of the Air Force. I have been working full time ever since. So when I got out, I went back to Syracuse. While I was working on the PhD, I was director of a residence hall, turned it into a living learning center, became a fundraiser for the Carrier Dome, went on to the University of Minnesota to become director of annual giving, took that program and in 3 years increased giving by 189%. And then I testified against my boss in a discrimination hearing, and life became unpleasant. So I ended up working in the vice president for finance office as an internal management consultant. Toward the end of the last year or year and a half in that role, the vice president was a gentleman named David Lilly. David had retired as CEO of Toro. He had really been the driving force to make Toro a national and international brand. Had then served on the Federal Reserve Board, been the dean of the School of Management at the University of Minnesota. And when the university got a new president and the board told the president it's time to downsize the university because there's a statewide community college system, there's a statewide Minnesota State University system. The university has to stop being all things to all people. David said, when we change our purpose, we need to change our form. And so he brought in KPMG's higher education consulting team to help restructure both the university and its key processes. And I became the project manager on the university side for that effort. We made a lot of change and recommended a lot of change. One of the changes we recommended was the elimination of my job. After that happened, and they had not said a word before that happened, after that decision was made to eliminate my job, they invited me to New York to interview with them, and that's what brought me to the East Coast. So I spent the next 4 years consulting primarily around mergers and opportunities, or mergers and acquisitions in higher ed. Went to work at that point for an AIDS nonprofit that provided permanent housing support services for homeless people with AIDS in New York. They had grown from nothing to a multi-million-dollar organization and was still keeping their books on spreadsheets. So I was brought in to create a stabilizing infrastructure that was not administratively burdensome. And then I went into change management consulting and did that for probably 10 years before I got tired of living in hotels and airports. Stepped back and learned curriculum development. So I began to develop training programs for the change management consulting firm I had been working with. And back in 2016, I trained as a coach, and here I am.
Ryan, what can you tell me about, where is it? In your bio, when we had connected at first, I'd gotten your bio, learned a bit about you. We check each other out on LinkedIn, and the phrase wisdom circle keeper came up. So I want to ask you about that. Where does that come into your work? What does that mean? What's behind that?
I did more than help put together a Boy Scout troop on the Onondaga Reservation. I learned a lot about the culture of the Onondaga. They were one of the nations of the League of the Iroquois. I learned about the League of the Iroquois and a lot of their underpinning beliefs and practices. And when I was writing Leading into the Age of Wisdom, one of the things, there were a couple of things that really came back to me as important. The first, and I'll get to wisdom circles in just a minute, John.
Sure.
The first was seventh generation thinking. We look at life in most of Western society as something linear, something that has a beginning, something that has an end. And yet you and I, if we know how to sing, and I don't, we could probably do a duet on The Circle of Life from The Lion King. The circle of life is an indigenous principle. And the Iroquois made their decisions not like we do on a quarterly basis. Is this right for this quarter? Is this right for our shareholders in the next fiscal year? The foundation of their decision-making was the seventh generation. And so seventh generation thinking is very important to me because I just released a paper yesterday on Substack about lessons from the steam engine. If we go back to the invention of the steam engine and some of the decisions that were made then, they made a lot of short-term sense, but they set us on some very unhealthy longer-term paths. And so one of the things I'm saying about AI, we touched on earlier, is we need to think through our decisions more carefully about how we institutionalize this technology. And that brings me to wisdom circles.
Brian, just to jump in quickly, when you say seventh generation thinking, does that mean they're thinking 7 generations out? Okay. Just want to clarify that.
What is the impact that this decision is going to have over the next 7 generations?
Perfect.
Wisdom circles, we all know what masterminds are. Masterminds are, I have a problem, I have an opportunity, let me draw from the best of everybody's thinking to figure out how to move this forward. Wisdom circles are about doing things. Or I'm sorry, masterminds are about doing things. Wisdom circles are about being. How do I be a better leader? How do I be a better part of this team? How do I be wiser in my application of artificial intelligence? So they bring together a collection of people, and I launched complimentary wisdom circles late last year. I'm conducting right now 2 a month, but they were topics like energy, human energy. Our work doesn't get done by the 40 hours or 50 hours or 60 hours we put in every week. It gets done by our physical, mental, emotional, spiritual energy. So let's get wiser about how we use and restore our energies. I have one coming up this Friday, the role of love in leadership. I have one coming up after that on wayfinding when the maps no longer work.
Mm-hmm.
I have one coming up in mid-March on before the choice is made. They're about becoming wiser as people, as workers, as leaders.
Yeah, I love that. I love that because so much of the work in leadership coaching, it's not management. It's different from management. But still, I think in leadership, people confine themselves to a role. So a management role is very defined. You know what your area is. You know the tools you have. Leadership is a little more open. But I like what you're sharing about these circles in terms of understanding everything that goes into being, that it's not just the mission at hand. It's not just what you're doing at any given moment, but the leadership isn't there only when you're carrying out the work, but how you carry yourself in life is what I take away from what you share.
Absolutely, John. But, and let me give you a different example. Our organizations are structured the way Henry Ford structured his factories. Our 40-hour work week actually comes from Henry Ford. We act as if wisdom resides in the C-suite. Wisdom resides at every level of the organization.
Yeah.
The people who know most about what is and is not working with the customer are the frontline workers. The people who know most about what does and doesn't work about the products or services you're offering are the frontline workers. And so part of my mission is to say, let's rethink how wisdom shows up in our organizations at all levels. And let's leverage that wisdom from top to bottom. And let's even think about whether we should be structured in the same way top to bottom as we have been.
So then how does it play into interconnect with your Edgewalker Facilitator certification? Was that obviously your history with the wisdom predates, I'm assuming, the Edgewalker, but at what point did you start the Edgewalker work? And if you could explain, Brian, what the Edgewalker movement, I would say, just because I see everything that Judy, what you put out, if you could explain that'd be great, what it means.
Judy and I actually met in 2006. She had just recently, her organization at the time, had it awarded the Spirit at Work Award to Connor Partners, which was a change management consulting firm. I had designed a new training program for them, so I was in Atlanta to observe the training program. Judy had been invited to participate as a guest, and we met there and have maintained a connection ever since. That was when I first learned about Edgewalker, and I learned that I had been an Edgewalker my entire career and even in my college days. Edgewalkers are those people, those organizations that walk, if you will, between two worlds. And again, it can be an indigenous concept when we talk about the two spirit people, for example. But for me, my edge walking has always been between what is and what can be. And not what can be because I have I love coffee ice cream. I guess what can be is the only ice cream available in the world is coffee. That's not edge walking because that's selfish. That's not.
Yeah.
What is, what can be, what in terms of what's right for the world. So my walking this edge between the way businesses are executing AI today and the way they could be to make a more humane human workplace, that's edge walking.
Brian, I heard you mention your introversion, and you just brought up edge walking, what that means. And it calls me back to my conversation with Judy. And as she was describing what an edge walker was, I was like, holy shit, I'm an edge walker. Right. And I was introverted as a kid. I still have that introversion, not as restrictive as it used to be, right? You know how to kind of navigate life with it. So for you, I'm curious what your introversion has brought to your life and career. And then how do you tie that into the edge walking ability and foresight?
So I have actually, in my conversations with people who know me, changed the term from introvert to quiet. I'm a quiet person. But we all know introvert, extrovert, so I tend to use that word when I'm speaking publicly. Again, I grew up in the 50s and 60s. I knew from a very young age that I was different. I knew before I could put the label on that I was different. And then when I could put the label on, I knew that I couldn't share that difference because being gay was then classified as a psychiatric disorder. So I think that drove much of my introversion. I also grew up in a household where it wasn't, children should be seen and not heard. It was children should be neither seen nor heard. And so I think that contributed to the introversion too. It allowed me to be a lot more present with others because I wasn't putting myself forward. I was soaking others in. And so it really, I think, became the fuel early on for curiosity, for reflection, for self-assessment, and all of which contribute to growth.
Now, my next question is always, I want to hear from my guest how they tie in their childhood to their work today. You've spoken so much, making that connection. You just did it now based on how you grew up, your thinking, society at the time. What other words, if any, or if you want to clarify, how do you tie the work you're doing now, who you are today, to who you were as a kid? Again, you gave a great connection just a minute ago, but is there anything else you want to share in your words on who you were as a kid and how it ties to the work today?
Yeah, I do. For many years, I attended different men's circles, men's gatherings, and one of the questions that would always be asked is, what gifts did you receive from your father? And that was a hard question for me to answer for a while. And then I realized that growing up, I learned the importance of self-discipline because I had to work after school. I had to do my homework. Very often, my mother was at the pharmacy. My father was at the pharmacy. I had to take care of myself. So I learned self-care. I also learned that things don't just get handed to you, that you have to work hard for what you want. All of those are fundamental traits that still live in me today.
Right. What do you consider your superpower?
My superpower is the ability to see slightly over the horizon. It's an intuitive sense. I gave you one example when I said, by 2021, I was saying, I think we're on the verge of the equivalent of the Industrial Revolution. Back in the late 80s, when I was at KPMG, one of the things that they had me do is looking forward and saying, what changes are going to be happening in higher education, and what services might we develop to meet those changes when they arrive. So I think that's my big superpowers.
You've spoken a lot, obviously, with the different stories throughout your life about seeing something that in certain cases was unjust and you wanted to change it. So there's that difference that you wanted to see, the possibility between what is now and what should be, because something just doesn't seem right. But then when did that turn forward? Like, obviously that little thing I just did, it is about what can be. So it is that future. It's a changing state. But for you, when did that really turn future? Not just what can happen right now, that we can visualize what can actually change, how these people can be respected, how a mascot can be changed, how indigenous people can have a scholarship. Those are like quick little things, but now you're talking something that seems to be longer term. So when did it shift forward to something that's not incremental, but more further away?
I think my first investment in that direction, John, was in 1996, 5 or 6, when I left the AIDS Resource Center. I started a nonprofit, and the nonprofit was called the AIDS Futures Initiative. And it was based on the premise that AIDS wasn't going away. For those of us who remember those days, AIDS was largely still considered a gay male disease. It was terminal, almost without exception. And yet it was continuing to grow and infiltrate more and more different demographics of our population. So the AIDS Futures Initiative was intended to reframe the thinking about AIDS, that AIDS would be a part of our society for the foreseeable future, and that we needed to both make peace with that and find a way to move forward in that future in a less pejorative way, a healthier way, whatever. Unfortunately, what I found out is at that time, funding was going either to direct services or to research, and nobody wanted to fund the future. And so I think we struggled, and I lived on not a lot of income for about 2 years before I shut that down. But that was my first big foray into looking longer term.
Yeah, I knew there had to be something back in the history that kind of put you on that path to looking out further. So I appreciate that. And then the last question, Brian, before we jump into your book, what does leadership mean to you?
Leadership means you have followers not by force, but by their choice.
Yeah. Timely, simple. It's like a hallmark, a pillar of leadership. I appreciate that. So now, Brian, we can't get into your book. If you want, why don't you just introduce the book and how the book came to be, what the story is on the lead up to the book's publishing?
The book is Leading into the Age of Wisdom, Reimagining the Future of Work. I've touched on some of the pieces of the book. I really began to focus on artificial intelligence when I started hearing artificial intelligence can replace most of our entry-level white-collar workers. Artificial intelligence can replace my job, or before I get there, most of some professions like accounting. And then I heard a CEO of a tech company say, artificial intelligence can do my job. And I thought, if that is really true, what does that mean for humanity? What does that mean for our economy? If I can't go in at an entry level and learn skills and gain intelligence, but also gain wisdom, how do I then move up to a higher level of an organization? If we start filling in lower levels, if we think about the organizational pyramid with technology, how do we prepare people for the higher levels? And then I began to think, there's got to be a different perspective. And the perspective I landed on was that difference between intelligence and wisdom. And once I planted that seed, if you will, it was, what does this mean for the future of work? How do we rethink our organizations so they nurture wisdom and really use AI as the catalyst rather than solution?
Brian, so how did you structure this book? How did you structure it in terms of the path that you take down the reader on? So is this for somebody that has a solid foundation of understanding of AI? Is it somebody who's kind of a novice to AI? How did you kind of decide how to structure the book to get the message out there as best as possible?
You don't even have to know how to spell AI to get value out of the book. AI is the catalyst. AI is the catalyst for the book. AI is the catalyst for what the book is about. It really, again, my cultural anthropology background, my experience with organizational change over the years, my understanding of the psychology of people going through change. I've done a lot of personal learning, if you will, growth around the neuroscience of change. All of that became the foundation as I began to look at, for example, how do we bring the wisdom of the front lines into organizational life? A number of my podcast guests really helped inform me. Whether it's Rod Collins, who wrote Nobody is Smarter Than Everybody, or Jeffrey Beeson's leadership, network leadership, and others. I have a good colleague who has written and published several books, and she became sort of a counselor to me as I was going through the process. When I got the first draft written, and one more important piece, I wrote the book. ChatGPT was my brainstorming partner. When I got the first draft of the book done, I sent it to Linda, and she came back and she said, all of the energy is in the third part of this book. You need to find a way to restructure it. So, to your answer,
what was the structure at that time?
I honestly don't remember.
Come on, a general idea?
No, I think it was more historical.
Okay,
if I recall. But I took the entire manuscript and I fed it and the critique into ChatGPT, and I said, give me 3 different structures, chapter by chapter, and it did. And it would, for example, say you need to, you in this structure you can combine these 2 chapters. In this structure, you have a gap that you need to fill in. And so,
wow,
the final layout, the final flow of the book came from ChatGPT. And before we finish, John, I want to read you how ChatGPT summarized the book.
Yeah, please.
When we got all done, I asked ChatGPT to and I need to find it here. I asked ChatGPT to summarize it. And here's what it said. May you lead with courage when the path is unclear. May you listen for what wants to emerge, even in the quiet. May you remember that the wisdom you seek is already within you and also among you. May your leadership be an act of love, your presence a source of grounding, and your vision a light for the path ahead. Lead not to control, but to liberate. Lead not to be followed, but to walk together. This is the way, this is the work, this is leadership in the age of wisdom.
Wow. So that summary brings up a question for me. We've talked about intelligence, and then we've talked about the differentiating factor of wisdom. That to me is thought-provoking. So to me, it's not the information of intelligence, and you can't trust it to be wisdom. Just because it makes you think doesn't mean it makes you kind of think in the right. And listen, this is not my wheelhouse, so I apologize if I'm putting the wrong words to it. But can you speak to what do you make of that excerpt that it gave you?
It's exactly the message of the book. That's exactly the message. I did not edit one word of that.
So what do you think about that, though, in terms of your discussion on intelligence, and that doesn't mean you have wisdom? Does thought-provoking provocation, does that fall somewhere in between intelligence and wisdom, where it can get you to think, but it's not quite the
Wisdom,
training or the teaching of wisdom?
wisdom comes from experience. Wisdom comes from following our intuition and being successful at something. Wisdom comes from choosing a path that turns out to be really frickin' stupid.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. And I'm not saying that what you just read is a stand-in. I don't even connect it to wisdom, but it is thought-provoking, which to me is different than just intelligence giving me information or facts or anything like that. So to me, even just listening to that, I wonder how many people would be inspired just by that, by what they heard. So to me, it's just incredible that, I don't know, there seems to be this kind of buffer between intelligence and wisdom. It's something that really gets you to think. And again, it's summarizing your book, so it had source material to pull from.
Yeah. I think for me, it's a reminder that we do need that provocation. We do need that
Prompt.
prompt, if you will,
Yeah.
that says, I'm not just going to act on what artificial intelligence tells me is the best path forward. I am, and that's really the focus of the wisdom circle on what happens before the choice. Artificial intelligence fits well into this crazy spinning, turbulent, ever faster world we're living in because it prompts us to be ever faster. And what we know is fast choices are not always wise choices.
Amen.
And so that summary, wisdom circles, the recognition of the difference between intelligence and wisdom, all of those are prompts to say, slow down before you make this choice. And also, and I'll give you just one example in a moment, also, you don't have to do it alone. Remember Blockbuster?
Oh, yeah.
Blockbusters.
Spent many nights there.
And you probably spent many dollars on late fees.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Late fees became a primary source of revenue for Blockbuster because there was no brick and mortar, there was no inventory involved. It was just pure income. And back in the early 2000s, they actually hired a PR agency to develop an advertising campaign that made John believe that it benefited him to pay late fees. At the same time, the founders of Netflix came into the CEO of Blockbuster and said, we're $50 million in debt. For $50 million, you can have Netflix. And he threw them out.
It's incredible
that was based on his wisdom.
Yeah. At the
time. That said late fees are it. They're our path forward. Kodak invented the digital camera.
Yeah.
And forgot that their role was not selling film. It was preserving images.
Yeah. I love those examples of companies that created something and then another company just came through and ran with it and saw that vision. I mean, the biggest one that comes to mind for me is Apple, where I don't think they really invented anything. I may be wrong, but it always seemed like they took something that was already there in some shape or form and provided an experience to go along with it. they provided a story to go along with it. So I love those stories. And the Netflix thing, it's incredible how it's one of the biggest companies in the world now. And I remember when I first heard about them and I was getting the DVDs in the mail and all that, chapters ages ago. Brian, so can you provide just maybe a few chapter titles from your book, kind of in the order that they're laid out? Just a few. It doesn't have to be all, just to kind of give a sense to people of what's in the book specifically, what kind of breakdowns you provide.
Okay, so the book is in 3 parts. Part 1 is reclaiming the human core. And the first chapter in that is wisdom is our human core. Then we talk about the difference between knowledge, intelligence, and wisdom. Part 2 is rethinking work. And look at why our traditional organizational structure of the pyramid, the hierarchy, is crumbling. So some of the chapters are the pyramids are crumbling. Work isn't what it used to be. Organizing for belonging. I make the point in the book, if you want me to come into the workplace, physically or virtually, and share my wisdom, I need to feel like I belong. And so that makes belonging not politically correct or politically incorrect. It makes it a strategic imperative. So there is a chapter on organizing for belonging and several other chapters. And then part 3 is leading into the age of wisdom. And we start that part from getting to now, from agrarian to industrial to wisdom, the end of one age, the birth of another age, and then moving into becoming an age of wisdom leader.
Brian, I'm curious in writing it, and I ask all my author guests the same question. In writing it, typically the person writing it is one of the foremost experts, specialists. They're curious about it, whatever. They live in that world. That's their wheelhouse. But even they, as they're writing their book, sometimes things change. They learn new things. They see things differently. For you, I'm curious, in putting this book together, what changed in you in terms of how you view the material? Especially knowing how quickly this sector changes and how writing a book, minimally, it takes a couple months. That aside, though, what changed in you in your process of writing the book?
A lot. And I think most fundamentally, I discovered gaps in my own understanding that I had to fill in. I discovered, and I had known this, but I wasn't able to really put words on it. I studied change management under Daryl Conner. Daryl is probably the least well-known name, but William Bridges and John Cotter and Daryl all began building this profession of organizational change management at the same time. For most of my time in that profession, I would say that what I learned is still true. The onion just keeps getting peeled back and back and back, and we learn more and more and more. The field of change management has to change because A, there are some big gaps. B, is built on that hierarchical model, and we know that Gen Z doesn't yield very well to authority. And D, change itself has changed.
Yeah.
Change management was about, we're going to start a project, we're going to complete a project, we're going to meet our goals or not, we're going to meet our budget or not, we're going to meet the schedule or not. Change is, we still have those change management, those change projects, but we also live in a world of continuous change. So really my understanding of how we need to move forward has changed. And then on a different scale, I mentioned earlier, I started off in architecture, and one of my heroes was Frank Lloyd Wright. And one of the quotes that I remember from Frank Lloyd Wright for all these years is form follows function. And then writing the book, I learned that there is something more. Form follows function. That has, and I'm quoting Frank Lloyd right now, form follows function. That has been misunderstood. Form and function should be one, joined in a spiritual union. And so one of the things that has changed for me is a much deeper appreciation of the role that, whether you call it spirit, soul, love, has to play in the future of work. When I was interviewing leaders, those three words continuously came out. Now, it's probably in part the people that I have connection with that I could interview for the book, but spirit, soul, love. Imagine if a leader brought love into the workplace. We're not talking about, I'm up on the jumbotron.
Yeah.
We're talking about,
no Coldplay.
I care about you, John. I'm here to support you, to help you. I'm going to hold you accountable. I'm not, this is
Absolutely.
not, but I'm here to support your growth, your health, your well-being, while you support us moving forward.
I think that's making the rounds little by little. I think people are getting more comfortable with using that word love. I mean, it's not moving as quickly as we'd like, but I think the workplace is evolving. I think it's weird that change management is still a thing when the workplace is changing so quickly, but hopefully we continue down that path. Brian, for you, aside from your Substack, is there any other writing in your future? Anything else that you want to cover? Any other areas you want to go into with any other books or anything?
I don't know. It's very interesting. I had a conversation with a colleague yesterday who is also an author. And we were talking about the fact that the world of books is so overwhelming at this point. What is the future of getting the message out? Is it another book?
Yeah.
Is it more short form, such as Substack? Is it podcasts? I think it's probably all the above.
Yeah.
So I have no idea. I have seriously thought about writing 3 or 4 books before this one. I've started a few, and this was the first that just lived inside me long enough to come out. There may be another one there. I don't know.
Yeah. I mean, obviously I asked the question of the authors because that's the nature of their particular lane as we're covering it. But you're right. There's so many different mediums where maybe in the past, for you to get that energy, that love, that conviction, that training, that experience, everything that makes you who you are and more out to the people, maybe book was the best form. Sometimes it still is, but there are so many other platforms like Substack, like blogs, podcasting, for instance. So I appreciate that response. Brian, what book has inspired you? Obviously, we're here talking about yours. Which one stands out most to you?
I can't name one.
They're just because there's so many, I'm assuming.
Yeah, I have 150 some episodes of conversations out in the world. Probably 100 or more are based on books. And every one of those books I've read cover to cover. I have one recording coming up where I will confess on the air I have not read the book cover to cover because it's 500 some pages long. But I have read those parts of the book that are most relevant to my audience and can be covered in a single episode of a podcast. I think some of them that really have spoken to me of late. Marty Strong, who is a retired Navy SEAL commander and is now a corporate CEO, wrote several books. Be Visionary and Be Different are two of his books that really stand out to me. I mentioned Jeffrey Beeson's Network Leadership, Rod Collins, Nobody is Smarter Than Everybody. Phil Gilbert, who literally changed the culture of IBM globally, wrote Irresistible Change. I think coming out this week, actually, as we're recording this, is a podcast by two gentlemen, or on a book by two gentlemen, one of whom is my guest on the podcast, called AI and the Octopus Organization, that looks at how the octopus survived a meteor crashing into Earth, and the ammonites, which are those crustaceans that have the Fibonacci sequence kind of shell, were killed, and how does the octopus survive significant disruptions? Well, I learned a lot from that book. Actually, the octopus has 9 brains.
Did not know that.
Each tentacle has a brain of its own and can function on its own. They synchronize through a neural necklace, and the central brain of the octopus is about 30% of its brain power. So one tentacle can be exploring a cave while another tentacle is grabbing a clam to eat. And then they have thousands of sensors. Each of their suction cups is a sensor. And the message, again, very much like my writing, is we need to get the collective brains across the organization, not just one central brain. We need to synchronize them, but we also need to take in the sensory observations, the wisdom of those thousands of people that are interfacing with the outside world every day. So
that's a great symbol for that network.
Every book I find something new, interesting, exciting.
Brian, what I was going to ask is, can you just provide a brief breakdown of the history of your podcast, how that came up, what your aim is with the series?
So this is actually my 3rd podcast. I started sharing podcasting duties. So sometimes she would host the podcast, sometimes I would, when I was managing editor at Change Management Review. For several years, I was in a business relationship called the Doobie Associates. It's about doing and being, not smoking.
I did wonder. Okay.
Well, our tagline was, when times are tough in business, it's Doobie time. But it is about doing and being. And so we had It's Doobie Time podcast that had close to 100 episodes. And then I went to work for a company that's no longer in business called Quantivos. And they were just beginning to grow and get some visibility. And I said, if you want, I'll host a podcast for you. And they were a professional development firm focused on coaching as the modality for professional development. But we were working with everything from frontline leaders up to the C-suite. And so the focus of the podcast was sort of corporate leadership at all levels. And it, just like It's Doobie Time, which started shortly after the COVID shutdown, the focus has changed over 150 episodes. I mean, we're 3 years in now, as circumstances have changed, and we continue to try to bring, as you said earlier, the forward-thinking voices that are going to help inform how leaders are leading.
Beautiful. Brian, and in wrapping up, is there anything else you want to bring up about what you're up to these days? Anything that I didn't ask that you want to mention? Anything at all? The floor is yours.
I think the only thing I want to say is you're a leader if you have followers by their choice. And leadership today, actually, I'm going to go a little bit deeper. Leadership today takes head, heart, gut, and fortitude. And I'm going to bring some neuroscience into that. Because in our hearts, we have the same motor neurons, the same sensory neurons, the same electrochemical activity as we have in our heads. In our guts, we have about as many neurons as a cat's brain between our esophagus and the other end of our digestive tract. And each of these, not every neuroscientist will call them a brain. Some will call them a neural network or a neural cluster. But each of these has information and wisdom. And so listening to your heart is listening to your values, listening to your passion, listening to your compassion. We know when somebody's heart is not in it. We know when our heart is broken. That's real. That is not woo-woo. There is science. Listening to your gut, that's where your courage is. That's where your self-protection is. That's where who you are at your core is. We need leaders today who listen to the head, the heart, and the gut, and they do so with fortitude.
Yeah. Just thinking of what's at stake when that doesn't happen, when it doesn't take place. Obviously, without going into it, we're seeing the result, the trickle effect, the tsunami of what happens when that doesn't take place. So I would love for people to keep that in mind, that it's much more than just a label. It's much more than responsibilities, leadership. So thank you for putting it beautifully that way, Brian.
Thank you, John.
And again, Brian shared his book, Leading into the Age of Wisdom, Reimagining the Future of Work. Brian, thank you so much for being here, sitting down for this conversation.
I appreciate the opportunity.
And for those of you watching, if there's anything or listening, if there's anything that I might have missed, please let me know. We're limited on time, so much to get to, a lot of rabbit holes. I can drag my authors and guests down. But if there's anything that you think that I should have asked, please let me know, and I'll reach out to Brian, see what kind of additional guidance, wisdom, knowledge, anything at all he might be able to provide. In the meantime, thank you for watching, listening, and subscribing, and I'll talk to you soon. Take care. Bye.